My name is Margaret Hale, but everyone calls me Maggie. I am 55, a widow, and until recently, my life in the cosy, sun-drenched four-bedroom home my late husband, Arthur, and I built was a tranquil blend of gardening and volunteering. The quiet predictability was a comforting blanket, woven from a decade of solitude. Then my only son, Daniel, called. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early September. The air still held the warmth of summer, but the promise of autumn hung crisp on the breeze. Daniel, my bright, handsome son, now in his mid-30s, arrived unannounced from Seattle. He was a successful engineer, but today his usual confident posture was replaced with a nervous slump. He sat me down in the living room, the same room where he had taken his first steps, and dropped the bombshell. "Mom," he started, his voice firm but rushed. "We need to talk about the living situation." Before I could ask, my daughter-in-law, Sarah, glided into the room. She was followed by her mother, Mrs. Eleanor Albright, whom I only knew from a few stilted holiday dinners. Sarah's expression was strangely serene, almost triumphant. Daniel avoided my eyes. "We decided to move back to Portland. The housing market is impossible, and with the two kids and Sarah's mother needing support, well..." He gestured vaguely around my spacious, quiet home. Then came the knife twist. "Wife, the kids, and your mother-in-law will be living here. It's a bit cramped, but we've decided." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Decided. He hadn't asked, he hadn't consulted, he had simply presented a fait accompli. 3 generations of a new, complex family unit were annexing my sanctuary. My heart sank into the deep, cold pit of my stomach. Shock, disbelief, heart sinking. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold despite the afternoon sun streaming through the window. I looked at my son, the boy I raised with Arthur, sacrificing trips and promotions to ensure his stability. I wondered, is this really the child I raised? The other characters were immediately present, settling in before they had even unpacked. Sarah smiled subtly, a slight satisfied curve of the lips, as if claiming victory over me without a single word. Mrs. Albright stood slightly behind her, watching with a self-satisfied smugness, her arms crossed like a sentry guarding a newly conquered territory. In that instant, my quiet life was over. The home Arthur and I built was no longer mine. It was a contested plot in a silent, unexpected war. The first few weeks were a relentless erosion of my identity. They didn't storm the castle. They chipped away at the foundation. The subtle manipulation began immediately, spearheaded by Mrs. Albright, who positioned herself as the household manager. The kitchen was my domain, my comfort zone. Arthur had custom-made the spice rack, and I cherished the mismatched collection of mugs from our travels. One morning, I walked in to find Sarah and Eleanor discussing cabinet layouts. "It's just so dated, Maggie," Sarah said, not unkindly, but with a condescending pity that stung more than outright criticism. "We've hired a contractor. We're going to open this wall and install an island. Daniel agrees we need a more modern, functional space for the children." "An island?" I stammered. "But where will Arthur's spice rack go? And my mugs?" Eleanor, who had already begun emptying the cabinets, pulled out a chipped mug from Florence, one Arthur and I had bought on our last trip. She held it between 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Sentimental clutter, dear," Eleanor announced, dropping it carelessly into a large garbage bag. The sound of the ceramic shattering on the bottom of the bag was a sharp, final report. "We need space for the professional espresso machine. Daniel insists." I looked at Daniel, who was on his phone pretending to check emails. My inner disappointment was a physical ache. Each time my son sides with his wife, I feel betrayed. I wanted him to say, "Stop, that mug is important to Mom," but he only cleared his throat and murmured, "It's time to update, Mom. It's better for resale value." The word resale hit me harder than the broken ceramic. The loneliness grew in my own home. I was losing influence and voice. The next major skirmish occurred during Sunday dinner, a sacred tradition I maintained. I had prepared my husband's favourite pot roast. Eleanor, however, took centre stage. "Margaret, darling," Eleanor said loudly, pushing her plate away after only a bite. "This roast is terribly overcooked. Dry, really. And the potatoes are criminally bland. Do you still use that iodized salt? Sarah, remind me to show Margaret how to properly brine beef tomorrow. It's a very simple trick." The argument wasn't about the food, it was about dominance. She had deliberately embarrassed me in front of my son, my grandchildren, and, worst of all, in front of Donna, who had joined us. Daniel looked down at his plate, fidgeting with his fork, refusing to meet my gaze. My face flushed with humiliation. "It's fine, Eleanor," Daniel mumbled, clearly wanting the tension to dissipate, effectively validating Eleanor's criticism by his silence. But Donna wasn't having it. Donna, my formidable friend from the Willow Creek days, set down her cutlery with a decisive clink. "Eleanor!" Donna's voice sliced through the dining room air, sharp and clear. "Margaret's roast is perfect. It's exactly the same recipe she's used for 30 years, and it's delicious. I actually think your palate might be fatigued from all that. Subtle salt in the canned soup you brought for lunch." Eleanor's smug expression dissolved into a gasp of outrage. "How dare you, you old biddy?" "I dare because this is Margaret's table, and in her home, we are polite," Donna retorted, her eyes locked onto Eleanor's. "If you want Michelin star quality, book a reservation. Until then, you will show gratitude, not judgment." Eleanor stood up abruptly, dragging Sarah with her. "Come, Sarah. We don't need to be subjected to this common hostility." Daniel finally spoke, but not to Eleanor. "Mom, Donna, you shouldn't have caused a scene." His words were the final shard of betrayal, the final straw before I realized the severity of the situation came over my granddaughter's tutoring. I was a retired school librarian and had planned to spend the summer helping 8-year-old Lily catch up on reading. "I'm sorry, Maggie, that's not happening," Sarah declared one morning, pulling Lily away from my reading nook. "You're a wonderful grandmother, but Daniel and I decided Lily needs a prestigious, private summer program, not amateur reading sessions in the attic. We can't jeopardize her college applications later." Amateur reading sessions. The phrase burned. It wasn't about Lily's education. It was about defining me as inconsequential, removing my influence over the one thing that mattered most: my grandchildren. Evenings were now filled with subtle, calculated arguments, the daughter-in-law always turning the tables to make me look unreasonable. The loneliness intensified. Neighbours, like Donna, noticed the palpable tension, the cold silence radiating from my home. The social pressure was suffocating. I felt constantly judged, corrected, and dismissed in my own house. The persistent talk of resale value, the forced renovations, and the continuous financial stress Daniel seemed to be under finally triggered a deeper suspicion. They weren't just moving in, they were moving to take over. One afternoon, while Sarah and Eleanor were out, I found a printout of an email tucked into a cookbook Eleanor had borrowed. It was a communication between Sarah and a real estate agent. The subject line was chilling. Valuation for 4-bed, single owner, Hale property. Realizing the scheme was like a lightning bolt. They weren't saving money by living here. They were systematically degrading my emotional ties to the house, making me feel unwelcome and forcing me to capitulate so they could sell it and finance their own high-end lifestyle, likely moving me to a modest, distant apartment or, worse, an assisted living facility. I knew then that I had to fight alone, as my son remained blinded by loyalty to his wife and the promise of a better future she manufactured for him. The deep frustration of his betrayal fueled a growing steely determination. My revenge plan was immediate and methodical. Plan details. 1. Digital footprint. I hired a discreet IT consultant, a former student of Daniel's I had helped years ago, to install forensic software on my home network to log all accessible documents and communications, focusing on their joint email accounts they occasionally used on my spare computer. 2. Paper trail. I began a step-by-step collection of physical evidence. I took photographs of every renovation damage, the shattered Florence mug, and Eleanor's suspicious utility bills, which seemed excessively high for a house their size. 3. The insurance scheme. I discovered the most damning detail. Sarah had subtly manipulated Daniel into listing her as a secondary beneficiary on Arthur's life insurance policy, claiming it was for the grandchildren's security, a move that gave her significant future control. 4. Using overconfidence. I knew Eleanor was a gossip. I deliberately mentioned to Donna, in the hall where Eleanor could hear, that I had a large amount of cash savings in a separate unregistered bank account, purely to see how they would react. They doubled down on their manipulation, suddenly being overly solicitous, convincing me they were desperate to get their hands on it. The unexpected scene arrived during a tense family meeting that Daniel had called to address the ongoing hostility, once again positioning me as the problem. "Mom, you have to stop causing problems. You're making Sarah upset, and frankly, Eleanor is right. The kitchen is outdated," Daniel said, his voice clipped and impatient. I remained silent, simply pulling out my phone. "I think before we discuss who is causing problems, we should listen to this," I said calmly, pressing play on a voice memo. It was a recording, taken from the nanny cam Sarah had insisted on installing to monitor the children, which Daniel had helped her install. The cam had picked up a conversation between Sarah and Eleanor after they thought Daniel had left the house, Sarah's voice cold and calculating. "He's so gullible, Mother. Once we get the appraisal, we can push her into the upscale independent living. The house sale covers the down payment on the new place and the kids' tuition. Daniel just sees the nice house. He doesn't see the cash cow." Eleanor's voice smug. "Just keep up the pressure. He thinks she's losing it anyway. When we get her to sign the power of attorney next week, it's done." The room went silent. The betrayal in the recording was visceral. Daniel's face, which had been set in annoyance, crumpled into pure horror. The realization of the depth of their scheme hit him like a physical blow. He stared at Sarah, who was frantically shaking her head, trying to deny the voice. That's not real. It's doctored," Sarah shrieked. I calmly placed a printed copy of the real estate email onto the coffee table next to the document showing the change in Arthur's beneficiary. Justice was served, not through violence, but through undeniable truth. Daniel finally looked at me, tears welling up, a decade of blind loyalty shattered in minutes. He finally stood with his mother. "Get out, Sarah," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying blend of rage and sorrow. "Both of you. Pack your bags, and you are out of my mother's house by the morning. The marriage is over." Sarah and Eleanor lost their credibility entirely. Eleanor, for the first time, looked truly panicked, realizing her future was not secured by this scheme. Their influence disappeared as quickly as the chill from a closing refrigerator door. The satisfying emotion of the moment wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was the profound relief of truth and fairness prevailing. The next morning, Daniel was a different man. He helped me change the locks and escorted Sarah and Eleanor out of the house. He stayed in a guest room for a week, quietly helping me clean, repair the kitchen, and most importantly, listening. Family balance was restored. I regained my voice, my influence, and my sanctuary. Danielle learned the devastating importance of honesty, the difference between love and manipulation, and the foundational respect owed to his mother. He started counselling and, 6 months later, moved to an apartment nearby, where we now have peaceful Sunday dinners again. The message I took away was one of the strength and resilience of a mother over 50. I realised that my quiet years had not made me weak. They had made me observant. The value of justice, truth, and integrity within a family is not an abstract concept. It is the foundation of love. Revenge is not punishment. It is the restoration of personal power and the balance of fairness. I sit in my repaired kitchen now, Drinking coffee from my treasured Florence mug, Daniel found the shards and paid a ceramic artist to recreate an identical one, feeling safe and secure. The quiet of my home returned, but it's a richer quiet now, filled with the understanding that even a small, gentle woman can fight and win when her home and her heart are under siege.